Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On this episode of Eating W's, we have our NFL Week 11 recap. But before we jump into those games, we're going to talk about just a few tidbits of news, starting with one release, which is the Indianapolis Colts releasing longtime linebacker Shaquille Leonard, who has had a very huge drop in his career. I mean, just 1 or 2 years ago, he was an all-pro linebacker, and now you barely hear about him until he got released now, which is just a crazy change of pace. And then sadly, a list of 3 injuries here, starting with the Vikings putting lineman Dean Lowry on the IR list with a torn pectoral muscle. The Chargers also put linebacker / edge rusher Joey Bosa on that same injury reserve list. And finally, Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow will miss the entire rest of the season with a wrist injury that he has undergone season-ending wrist surgery for. So very different effects there across those 3, but nonetheless 3 sad things to hear and things that will probably change the whole outcome of the season, especially with that Joe Burrow injury. So
Definitely with that one.
Crazy stuff there.
Changes the whole AFC landscape.
Especially that AFC North. It is the just definition of up for grabs right now. All those teams are so close together. But now we will jump into our game, starting with a team from the NFC North and the Minnesota Vikings, who on Sunday Night Football went to Denver to take on the Broncos and lost by 1 point by a score of 21-20. Denver. Now we had every opportunity to win this game. Our defense was absolutely balling out. Brian Flores has the magic touch, to say the least. If you remember, I was super excited when we first hired him, and he has paid off twofold so far. The change that our defense, the Vikings defense, has undergone is just absolutely immaculate. But Josh Dobbs finally shows some cracks in his armor. I'm not going to sit here and act like he's the only reason we lost the game, but he certainly did not play as well as he had the past few weeks. He had a lot of turnover-worthy plays, which are kind of arid or risky throws, and he had a lot of actual turnovers. Well, I guess he didn't. He only had the 1 fumble. But the Vikings as a team, of course, same situation, different week, had a lot of turnovers with 3 of them total. And I said it every single week the first 3 weeks, you can't go -3 in the turnover differential and expect to win. It's just not a thing. It's wildly impressive that we even keep ourselves in these games when going 0-3 in the turnover battle. It's just absolute insanity, because this whole season for the Vikings has just been absolute insanity, to say the least. But I'm still feeling okay. I think Josh Dobbs comes out and is a little safer with the ball. I think he runs a little more. I noticed he tried to force the pass a lot more, which I didn't like. Kind of what he thrives in is when plays break down, getting out there and getting the runs. So I think next week he focuses in on that again a little more, and we'll see if the Vikings can return to form.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that the Vikings let this one slip away from them. I was kind of surprised that if they would have won it too. So this is kind of one of those surprising on both ends. The Broncos kicked field goals most of the night, which was just enough to keep them alive. And then they got a nice touchdown catch from Cortland Sutton, who went up and high pointed the ball in the back of the end zone. And it was really another nice catch by Sutton, who had a nice catch the previous week too on the boundary in the end zone too. So that Broncos offense has really shown that it can come together. The wide receivers, especially Sutton, are really starting to prove that they belong in the NFL. And I said that the Vikings weren't going to score enough points and the run game was going to be the weakness. They surprisingly ran the ball pretty well with Madison and Ty Chandler both. So, but they still were just not able to score quite enough with the Broncos getting 1 point better than them.
Yep, we had our chance at the end to drive down and get the field goal, but could not. Just one little quick correction on something I said. I was wrong. We actually had 4 turnovers. So we were -4 in the turnover differential. So even more impressive that we only lost by a point, the fact that we were 0-4. But I digress. I digress. Next up, we have another NFC North team, believe it or not, the Packers this time, with the Los Angeles Chargers heading into Lambeau to take on the Packers. And the Packers, speaking of surprises, picking up a pretty surprising win by a score of 23-20.
And this was Jordan Love's signature coming out game. He had his first 300-yard passing game, 2 touchdowns, and no turnovers, no fumbles, no interceptions, and that's huge. That shows that he can really make he showed he can really make the big throws with long touchdown passes to Jaden Reed and Christian Watson, who finally got off the schneid and got a touchdown catch after having a couple taken away from him in the past couple of weeks. But I really liked the way our run defense played, and I really kind of gave them the opposite of benefit of the doubt last week. I can't think of what that would be right now, but the opposite of that, because I thought they were going to get gashed by Austin Eckler and Josh Kelly, who I thought were going to single-handedly take the game over, but we were able to control them and keep them under 100 yards rushing, and I was very pleased with that performance.
Yeah, that's a pretty decent rushing team to keep under 100 yards rushing. I know they focus on the pass, but they do have some pretty skilled running backs there. I look at this game and I just don't understand how the Chargers continue to lose. They are, I say it all the time, but they are the Vikings of the AFC. It's just crazy. I don't by any means hate Brandon Staley, and they just brought in Kellen Moore this offseason, who I really liked. But it's the coaching somewhere. They got to make a switch somewhere because their players aren't playing bad. No. I saw this thing that through PFF rankings, Justin Herbert was actually the number 1 player this week in PFF rankings at like a 93 grade, 93 out of 100. However,
he played very well. Justin Herbert almost took the game over and won it by himself.
I mean, when your defense only allows 20, 23 points and your quarterback is playing that on point, and then you lose to this under 500 team, it's just, there's clearly something that's not happening with the players. I hate to sit there and say it's the coaches, but if it's not the players, not the fans, coaches are the only one that's left.
Well, there were a couple of bad drops by both Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston.
That's true. I forgot about those drops.
Those were 2 drops. One, both would have nearly been sure touchdowns. At least would have put them in the red zone. So if not for those drops, we're maybe talking about a different score of this game.
That's true. I didn't get to watch much of this one, so I won't say too many specifics, but there's just clearly something going on there in Los Angeles. Now moving on, we're going to jump to my game of the week, and what we actually had marked as our game of the week last week in our pick'ems. We have the Arizona Cardinals heading to Houston to take on an out-of-conference opponent in the Houston Texans, and the Texans pick up a win at home by a score of 21-16. Both quarterbacks absolutely balled out in this game. CJ Stroud put up 3 interceptions, but also put up 2 touchdowns and over 300 yards passing. So kind of rough on the interception front, but especially for him, who I want to say he's only had 1, maybe 2 interceptions all this season.
He had 2 prior to this week.
So he has more interceptions in this one game against a subpar defense than he has the entire season, which is just absolutely crazy. But, I mean, that just shows that it's not CJ Stroud carrying that team. If your quarterback can go out and put up 3 turnovers and you still end up winning a game, no matter how bad the opponent it is, that's awesome to see and really good for the Texans now and the future. Speaking of the future, Will Anderson Jr. picked up 2, if not 3 sacks on the game of a mobile Kyler Murray. So good stuff all around by the Texans and a really good game by the Cardinals as well. Kyler Murray has totally returned to form after this injury. I thought he was going to come in and kind of play crappy because of not playing or because he doesn't like being in Arizona, but it's been the opposite. He's came in and really performed well. But nonetheless, the Texans do pick up a win.
Yeah, and even though the Texans won, like you said, Kyler Murray's doing everything he can to prove that he can be the quarterback in Arizona, which they'll still probably going to get a high draft pick, which could fluctuate where they go, whether they go with the quarterback or if they go with an offensive weapon or defensive weapon. It'll be interesting to see when the draft comes up this year. But Kyler Murray is doing everything in his power to prove that he belongs there. And I thought it was a really good game by CJ Stroud, who proved that even though he had bad throws with the 3 interceptions, he can still perform in a good offense, and good offenses overcome turnovers. No offense to the Vikings, but good offenses overcome turnovers. Not when it's usually 0-3, 0-4, but
yeah, they only went like -2.
yeah, I think that they had a couple of defensive turnovers too on the Houston Texans side. So it'll be interesting to see where these two teams end up later on in this season. But I definitely think that the future is bright for both Arizona and Houston. And shout out to Tank Dell, who had another long touchdown catch and officially changed his name from Nathaniel to Tank Dell.
It was even on the Wire report.
Yep.
It was hilarious. It just made a note. But yeah, another 100-yard game for Tank Dell, where he had at least one, if not, I think 2 touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so.
So good stuff for him. And as you mentioned, 2 teams heading in the right direction, I think. Now, finally, speaking of a team heading in the wrong direction, but we have Callan's game of the week with the Chicago Bears heading to Detroit to take on the Lions in a divisional matchup. And though they had a 12-point lead when the final 4 minutes, they end up losing to Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Detroit 31, Bears 26.
And this was another one of those signs that it might just be the Lions type of year kind of games where they scored 17 points in less than 4 minutes with 2 long touchdown passes or two long touchdown drives to eat up those last 4 minutes and keep the Bears from getting even a chance to come back with a late sack and safety by Aiden Hutchinson, who of course took over the game when the game was on the line, which I'm afraid he will do this week too. But really, it was a nice performance by Justin Fields, who almost pulled off the upset. He had nearly 300 yards passing, and he had over 100 yards rushing, and he had a couple touchdowns. And if not for just that Bears defense and that conservative offense, and towards the end of the game, we might be talking about a different score in this game. But the Lions were able to be aggressive and came back and scored the 2 touchdowns to get ahead, and then got the safety on defense to put the game away.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to point out. I really do like Justin Fields. I think he did all he really could have to win this game, aside from maybe taking that sack at the end. But I shouldn't even say taking a sack, because he had like a second and a half in the pocket if he was lucky with how fast Aiden Hutchinson was coming in. So I just can't imagine that the Bears go with another quarterback in the draft. I think they have to end up going and getting something to help this guy out, because he showed that he's going to fight no matter how hurt he is, no matter how bad the situation is. He's going to come in and try to win for them. But nonetheless, really good stuff by the Lions, who get themselves in this terrible situation, but are able to kind of get themselves out of the corner. They keep fighting just like Justin Fields did. Of course, the Dan Campbell-led team is going to keep fighting. They're not going to have any quit in them. They hit a huge long touchdown to Jameson Williams, and then David Montgomery in his revenge game puts the candle on top and gets the win for the Lions with a late touchdown. Really good game overall by 2 teams heading in opposite directions, it almost seems like, unless Chicago can get their stuff together in this offseason. But nonetheless, certainly a good pick for game of the week.
It was an entertaining one.
Yep. So those were our reactions to week 11 of the NFL season. Make sure to stay tuned in until tomorrow when we give our week 12 predictions. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.